what's been really interesting to me is I followed this whole lab leak thing, right? Because early in the pandemic, people in my field started chattering about that. I love exotic animals, not to own them, right? But I'm really interested in animal conservation. And so the pangolin is an amazing animal. They pinned it on the pangolin early on, right? And there were articles published in good journals, several of which I'm on the editorial board for. So early in the pandemic, there were papers coming out really fast about, the sequence of the virus in pangolins, which were being sold in the Wuhan market, et cetera. And I was pretty disturbed by this, mostly because of the pictures of the Wuhan market. The exotic animal trade is just, it's horrible, right?
Yeah.
Okay, close confinement, these are beautiful animals that there's no justification for this stuff. But pangolin meat is sold at, I forget what it is per pound, but it's a delicacy, and it's considered very lucrative and to get pangolin meat of all things. There's actually a female pangolin meat influencer on YouTube, and so
really?
Oh yeah, no, it's like it starts to look like pangolin meat ASMR. It's crazy and disgusting. So they're kind of mixing, sexy women with exotic meats from these rare animals. It's just awful. So I was going deep down this rabbit hole of trying to understand this exotic animal trade, and then there was chatter in my field about the fact that one of the members of the laboratory in Wuhan that was working with these, very high restriction viruses, had done her training in the United States, which is true, has a master's degree, but was running a laboratory, which is unusual, right? Typically, the head of a laboratory is someone with a PhD, MD, or both. Very rare for a so-called PI, a principal investigator, like me, or another Matt Walker, for instance, principal investigator, to have less than a PhD. The fact that she ran a lab or was important in running this lab as a master's, with only a master's, is unusual. And then there was a lot of chatter in my field about the idea that it might have something to do with the fact that her significant other was a member of the Chinese Communist Party. And so, that laboratory had deep ties to the government and vice versa. And that's true of all laboratories in China, all laboratories. So the whole notion of the lab leak hypothesis was not foreign to scientists like me who thought, my laboratory works with rabies viruses, adenoviruses, Synbis viruses. None of these are as biohazardous as something like the coronavirus. But you work with these viruses and you have to use, lab coats, gloves, bleach sterilization. You're careful, hoods of but human error happens. So I'm not at all convinced one way or the other that it was a deliberate leak. But the idea that it would leak from a laboratory to a scientist like me who has what's called a wet lab, where with solutions and beakers and things of that sort, things happen all the time. Not in my laboratory. We're very careful and everyone's checked up on often. But the idea that human error could cause this is it was of course to all scientists early on.
Well, they had been cited in 2018 for violating safety protocols.
Yeah, I mean, all it takes is, people might not be familiar with what pipetting is, but it's basically taking a little straw that sucks up, press a button, it sucks up some fluid. You move things, between little tiny vials. It can be done by robots too, but typically it's done by humans. And that's how you put in a centrifuge, spin it, take off a little piece of that, or take the pellet out of the bottom that spun down, this kind of thing. All it takes is one loose thumb, and it's on a lab coat. All it takes is that lab coat going on a rack. All it takes is somebody leaving work, putting their lab coat on there and touching that lab coat, and it's out in the world. It's not that complicated.
Right.
So it doesn't have to be that somebody had a plan to let this out. It could be. I don't have any knowledge of that. But the idea that it would come from a lab, to me, is far more plausible than the idea that it came from some pangolin sequence in the Wuhan market.